Good evening, everybody. I am Todd Winston with New York City Audubon, and I'm so excited to have you all here with me tonight for this beginning birding webinar to learn about the amazing bird life that you can see in New York City and a little bit about how to identify those birds and how to learn more. So I'm just going to chat here for a few minutes as people log on. Um, and also go over a few nuts and bolts for the presentation tonight. We have both the chat and the Q&A open, and they will remain open for the entire webinar, which runs till 7:30. I'd ask that you please use the chat for, I'm seeing the chat here. I'm excited that you're excited about titmice, cardinals, and blue jays. The chat, I would like to be used for comments just like that. If you're enthusiastic, want to share. Also, I'll be asking a few questions throughout the presentation. So please feel free to put your answers in the chat. The Q&A, on the other hand, let's leave for questions for me. As I'm giving the presentation, I probably won't be able to answer too many questions on the run, though I may here and there. But I'm hoping to have a few minutes left over at the end of the presentation to answer questions and talk a little bit about what we've been discussing. I think that's the basic rundown of logistics that everybody needs to know about. Again, welcome everyone. If you just joined, I'm Todd Winston with New York City Audubon. I have done a whole bunch of things for New York City Audubon over the past 12 or so years. I do a lot of writing for them as a communications manager for special projects. I'm a birding guide, and I teach normally our beginning birding course, which is 3 evenings and 2 field trips, spring and fall. It's honestly one of the favorite things that I do in my life. I love bringing new people to birds and sharing the joy that birds have given me through my life, which is just really an immense amount of happiness. I always get moved when I talk about this, which is sort of embarrassing, but it it goes to the point that birds mean a lot to me, and I know they probably mean a lot to you. Birds are amazing creatures. On the screen there, we see some common birds I think a lot of you are probably familiar with, and we are going to hear a little bit more about those guys during the presentation. The basic run of show here is that we're going to talk a little bit about why birds are so fantastic, share a little bit about our love for birds, and then I'll be talking about why New York City, perhaps unexpectedly, is such an amazing place to see birds. And then we'll get into exactly how you tell one bird from another, which I think is probably the reason that a lot of you are here tonight. And go into some detail about ID tips for birds. And then we'll end with some talk about what you need to get started birding, binoculars and field guides and such. So I'm really excited about this and glad you're all with me, and let's get started. Okay. Also, by the way, if you see any problems with the presentation or anything, or hear any problems, please let us know through the chat, and either I or my very capable colleague Danielle, who's in the background here, will try to fix the problem. Okay. Yeah, I know that birds have been really important, and the outdoors have been really important for people during this pandemic. Answering something in the chat here, and I know that's been important for many people. So hopefully those of you who have discovered birds during this time, this will help you get more into it. It's really for me and many other people I know, an endless source of interest and fun, really, getting to know birds. Okay. I love starting with this slide because this is a picture of pintail ducks, which is a beautiful migratory species that comes through our area, and a pair of mallards in the center there, which is, most of you probably know, is a very common duck really around the world. The male on the bottom there and the female on top. And I love this picture because, mallards are such commonplace birds that we kind of take them for granted. And here they are flying over snowy mountains in Alaska. It really captures for me some of what really astonishes us about birds, that they are seemingly fragile and clearly beautiful creatures that seem quite vulnerable, and they are, and yet simultaneously they are fierce, resilient creatures that fly thousands of miles during migration, survive temperatures in which people would perish quite quickly. Birds are really quite strong creatures that have lived, as we will talk about, far longer than humans. They've been around for a long time, and they're exquisitely adapted to their lifestyles and to their habitats here on Earth. This bird, the Arctic tern, is considered the champion of migration. This little bird that just weighs 4 ounces flies from Greenland to Antarctica and back every year, a 43,000 mile round trip, 43,000 miles each year back and forth. Incredible. Of course, bird flight, I think, is one of the things that has inspired people about birds probably for as long as people have been people and have watched birds. It's something that I think many of us have dreamed of doing. It represents a kind of freedom that birds attain so effortlessly. And um, uh, I think it's something that is a basic joy of birds, is simply the vicarious freedom that we feel when we see them going about their business, flying through the air. This is the Arctic tern. Birds are, of course, beautiful. They have come in an incredible kaleidoscope of colors. These are a bunch of birds in the more or less finch and bunting family, the house finch, American goldfinch, and indigo bunting. Um, they come in sort of surreal patterns, like this harlequin duck, a bird that is seen here in the wintertime along our coast in rough waters around jetties often. And they are beautiful even when they're a bit more subtle. The beautiful cedar waxwing with the little waxy tips on his wings, for which it's named, and tail. And of course, birds do something else extraordinary. The little song sparrow, though not the flashiest of our birds, does what all songbirds do. They sing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that a little later on, about bird sounds. And I think it's another characteristic of birds that's really entranced people through time. A lot of poetry has been written about bird song, and people probably emulated it as well, because of course we are another creature that sings. Oops, cut him off there. Sorry. We'll hear some more birdsong later. Many of us come to birding through what we call a spark bird. If you haven't heard that, it's basically the bird that sparks your interest in birds. And for me, I have to give sort of an honorable mention here to the hummingbird. I've been obsessed with hummingbirds my whole life. I find them magical, just incredible. The names we've given to hummingbirds, many South American hummingbirds like Sylph, Fairy, they represent how much they blow our minds. They seem of another world. Um, However, my true spark bird is probably this bird. Some of you might recognize. This is the evening grosbeak. There's actually been, I think, a few evening grosbeaks in the city recently, they're not very common here. They often visit us in the winter. Uh, Actually, not often. They occasionally visit us in the winter, some winters. But I remember it's really one of my first memories of birds when I was 6 years old. We had a feeder against our windowsill in our kitchen, and evening grosbeaks, which are a northern species that occasionally come south. They do what we call erupt, IRRUEUPT, not erupt like a volcano, but erupt. They come south. Certain winters, probably due to food shortages, due to in their native habitat, possibly because it's been a good breeding year and there are a lot of evening grosbeaks around. Anyway, that year they came south and it suddenly arrived in this crazy cacophony on our bird feeder, and I've always remembered it as a little boy who already was interested in birds and knew all the birds that came to the bird feeder. This sudden group of raucous bullying birds that arrived in such bright colors just really um, uh, made a mark. And I've actually had dreams for the rest of my life of birds coming to that bird feeder and to the trees around the bird feeder, like evening grosbeaks. But also, I imagine all sorts of things coming: exotic parrots, hummingbirds, cranes flying over. It's a magical dream that's repeated in my life. Oops, sorry about that. Since that first encounter. I'd love to hear from some of you what you think, what your spark bird is, if you have one. Maybe put it in the chat. Do any of you have a spark bird or a bird that really kind of first awakened your interest in birds? Don't be shy. I hope you'll feel free to share here. And by the way, while you're maybe thinking of that, I just wanted to say that while we're birding and learning about birds, I really try to, in my walks, and to make it an experience where there's really no way of getting a wrong answer. Birding, like anything else, is something that you learn, and you don't know it until you know it. And the only way to know it is to know that you don't know it, if you know what I mean. So, that's really the key, is allowing yourself to be ignorant and find out things you don't know. And that's the joy of it too, right? Is that birds are a whole world of information that it's out there for you to explore. I think of it kind of like learning a language. It opens up a whole new world, and there's always more to learn. That's really what, to part of what I think has captivated me. I see all kinds of birds coming up. Cardinals and blue jays are seem to be very common here. That's not surprising. They're so common that birders take them advantage, but they're so beautiful, those birds. And people who are not from our area often are very excited to see them, which amuses people who are longtime birders sometimes, but it shouldn't, because they're so beautiful. The red-bellied woodpecker is a bird that, on beginning birding walks, after we've been on a walk, we've seen all kinds of warblers and flycatchers, things we don't usually see. I always know at the end of the walk, if I say, "What was your favorite bird?" people are going to say the red-bellied woodpecker, because he's so beautiful and patient, and he hangs out, and you can see him. I do see some warblers there. Black-throated green warbler is a beautiful, beautiful bird. Oh wow, great blue heron. Great blue heron is a bird that nests on Staten Island, if you don't know that. And Phoebe's nest over Phoebe is a flycatcher that we're going to see a little later on, that nested in our barn when I was a kid. Wow, so many birds here. I can't cover them all, but I'm really glad you're all sharing. Bald eagles and chickadees. Wow, some of you have a lot. We also are going to see some owls. I could not leave us without some owls, so never fear. We will see a few owls in this presentation as well. I know a lot of people love those. Okay, great. I'm glad that you're all excited. It gives me makes me very happy to see all the enthusiasm in the chat. Okay. By the way, I must say, I think birds bring out the corniest part of me. So those of you, I am quite earnest about birds, and I just let myself enjoy it. So I hope you will too. I know I'm a little bit of a cornball when it comes to this subject. Okay, New York City. Why in New York City, of all places, would birds be going on? You wouldn't think that this would be a good place to see birds. You might think this is the last place you'd want to look for birds. Most of you, I imagine, know that, in fact, there are a lot of good birds here. A lot of people living here, though, don't realize that. They do know a few birds, though. This bird they know so well that they recognize it just sticking its head out of a sewer. They know these little dudes. Sorry, that first one was the rock pigeon, an august and respectable bird who was brought here from Europe by people and has survived all over the world, as has the house sparrow, or we used to be called the English sparrow, because it was brought from Eurasia, like the rock pigeon. And the third of the triumvirate of immigrants that were brought here by people and have done well is the European starling. These three species are common in the city streets, and they're really common in city streets all over the world. They were brought by people to lots of different places, often as part of what were called acclimatization societies, which were societies that sought to bring all of the birds from Shakespeare's sonnets to foreign lands. That is an outdated concept and now understood not to be very ecologically sound. It did probably have a certain charm at the time. Uh, anyway, these three birds you're probably familiar with, and I like to give them credit. They're survivors. They've been here a long time, and though they do occasionally can cause some problems with native birds, I still don't like to badmouth them. Okay. A lot of you know, however, that lots of birds come through New York City. There's an incredible variety of bird life that passes through our city throughout the year. All the birds on this page, including a great horned owl up there that you'll see, um, are birds that are actually fairly expectable in New York City if you go to the right place at the right time. These birds are birds that I think I generally see in New York City every year. The owl, if I look for it, um, and am patient. Um, and so, yeah, New York City is an incredible place for birds, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of that later, real quick. Over 300 species have been recorded here, more than 350 in the area around the city. Over 275 species in Central Park alone. That's a lot of birds. And about 200 are regular visitors, birds that we can expect to see each year. So why NYC, asks this wise old pigeon. I thought this morning that he might be saying, why NYC? He could be a pigeon with a grievance. I imagine that pigeons have all sorts of grievances in New York City. But what I imagine him asking for the purposes of this presentation is why? Why is New York City important for birds? And the answer lies, the explanation of it, a way to start talking about it is talking about migration. Um, Birds migrate, they move from one place to another through the year. And over the past centuries, through observation and more recently through all sorts of technological research, we have gotten a clearer and clearer sense of how they migrate. We know that they migrate in certain pathways, which we can call flyways, which this map um, illustrates. And though some don't really like the flyway concept, they think it's sort of a little too. It implies something that's not exactly true, but it's certainly true that birds follow expectable paths, and groups of birds from in certain areas follow expectable paths that one can learn and delineate. In North America, um, we have what we can think of the migration pathways as being in four tracts, and we are in smack dab in the middle of the Atlantic flyway, that green flyway there on the right. And as birds fly north on that flyway in the spring and south on that flyway in the fall, between breeding grounds and wintering grounds, where birds in each of those places, birds generally stay for a while before they come migrating back. um, they come through New York City, and they get kind of funneled into the city as they come up the coast and sort of veer to the right or come down the coast, um, and then head down the more north-south coast from New England. And when they get here, through all of that green, they encounter an area that's pretty gray, right, with just a patchwork of green. I say just a patchwork, but it's actually an incredible preserved patchwork of green habitat in New York City, which is what makes New York City so important for birds, that we have lots of preserved habitat that people have, with great dedication and passion, worked to preserve over the past 150 years. And when birds get here, this is what they see. Many birds, particularly songbirds, migrate at night, when it's cooler and they're safer from predators, and they fly over the city. And as they come down to rest and feed near dawn, they see this. They see these oases of green, like Central Park here. You can see Randall's Island up there on the right and Riverside Park on the left. And they funnel into those patches of habitat. And that's what makes birding in New York City so amazing, that we have a concentration of birds. Not exactly great for the birds, it's good for birders. What is good for the birds is that the New York City Parks Department has become more and more conscious of enriching these areas for birds, so that habitats like the Ramble in Central Park, areas in all of our great parks are really rich for birds and provide them what they need during migration. A bird like this beautiful tree swallow. The tree swallow is one of my favorites. Such a beautiful little bird that migrates hundreds of miles and breeds here in the spring. Um, oops. Um, when we look at the tree swallow, what a fantastic creature, so different from us. And it makes me think, what is a bird? Um, what exactly is a bird, and how is a bird different from us, different from other animals, other moving creatures? What do birds have in common? And I'd love to hear your thoughts again about this. What do birds have in common? What um, what characteristics do birds have that other animals do not share? Or maybe they do share them, but what are some of the characteristics that we associate with birds? Feel free to put your thoughts in the chat. Yeah, someone mentioned tree swallows in Jamaica Bay. Tree swallows nest in Jamaica Bay. They love it there. The Park Service has put up lots of houses, and yeah, so great. Birds have wings. They fly, right? Feathers and flight, right? Great. They fly, and they fly with feathers. They sing, right? We sing, people sing. Apparently mice sing. They have tiny little high-pitched voices that they sing with. Um, they have beaks, right? Um, they're bipeds. They have two legs like people do, right? They walk on two legs. And great. They lay eggs. They do have tongues like we do, and like a number of creatures do. Often you can see birds' tongues as they feed. Right. Many birds do not fly. We believe that but all birds do have wings, and we believe that those do not fly actually derive from ancestors that did. That's been something that's changed over time as we've better understood birds' evolution. So, right, a lot of you have hit on a lot of great ones. Things that birds share with other organisms are things that some of which we share with them. We are also vertebrates. We're warm-blooded, meaning that we maintain a body temperature despite the outside temperature. We have two legs, like birds do. And then there's some things we also sing, the bottom one there. And then birds do things that have characteristics that we do not have. Where they lay external eggs. They have external eggs. They have wings, and most fly, and they have beaks. Right. Unique to birds, right? Feathers is a characteristic that really is unique to birds. That one of the things that makes a bird a bird. Birds have a fricula. Some of you be familiar from the wishbone of the turkey, right? That's a part of the skeletal system that helps protect the inner organs of birds as they fly, as they rather violently beat their wings, sometimes for days on end. Some birds for practically their whole life, except when they're nesting. And birds have several adaptations that allow them to fly, that they have evolved to be lighter, basically. They have hollow bones, and they have a specialized respiratory system that allows both a very efficient use of oxygen and also includes air sacs that are in their bones, increasing their buoyancy and also providing more air for them as they complete these incredible marathons of flight. And where did they come from? One of you just gave the answer there, and I think a lot of us know from our life experience, what we've read, where birds do come from. Of course, we know that throughout history, birds have served many useful purposes in transportation, in work efficiency, in office management. That's just a dumb joke, but couldn't resist including a little of the Flintstones here. And this picture of Fred Flintstone and Dino, Dino? Oh wow, it's been too long. I can't remember. Um, Points out something important. I think it's Dino, which is that though people did not coexist with dinosaurs. Dinosaurs are much more ancient than people. Dinosaurs died out around 60 million years ago, far before there was anything that would have been called a person on the earth. Birds, that's another story. Many of you might remember the fierce creature, the velociraptor. Thank you. Yes, it's Dino. Some of you might remember the fierce velociraptor from the Jurassic Park films. In that film, those velociraptors, as I recall, were quite scaly, sort of an old school scaly version of a dinosaur, rather lizard-like. We now believe, though, that velociraptors are actually among the dinosaurs that had sort of proto feathers, primitive feathers, and that the group of theropod dinosaurs to which velociraptors belong actually also includes birds. What this means is that birds are actually dinosaurs, which is, it's kind of a mind-blowing concept. And, though in some ways it could be a little academic, it's about classification, it's also just really a stunning thing to contemplate that these creatures that are around us every day, if we're outside, are so accessible to us, provide such beauty, are the last lineage of dinosaurs to live on the earth. It's something that never ceases to astonish me to think how ancient they are, and that we all grow up thinking about dinosaurs and how long ago they lived and dreaming about them, playing with them, and to think that these house sparrows we see on the street, they're right there. It's amazing to me. Between Velociraptor and modern birds, a lot of time went by, and somewhere along the way, about 150 million years ago, and that, by the way, tells you how long birds coexisted with dinosaurs, because of course, dinosaurs died out 60 million years ago. So a little math there, that's between about 90 million years between Archaeopteryx, which in Greek means ancient wing, archaeos and pteryx, and the demise of the dinosaurs. So birds and bird ancestors have been around for a very long time. You can see on the Archaeopteryx characteristics that are like our birds, and then some things that are not quite like our birds, right? They had feathers. They look as though they seem as though they probably flew to some extent. They have a bill or a beak. Sorry for the motorcycle noise here, if you can hear that. But they also had teeth, and they had claws on their wings. A few birds today, the young, have claws on their wings. The Hoatzin of South America has them, but I believe that they are thought to have evolved separately rather later on, rather than be a throwback. But it's interesting. Archaeopteryx also had a bony tail, which makes a tail heavy, right? So modern birds do not have bones in their tails. Modern birds, since these first proto-birds have diverged into an incredible variety of species across the planet, incredible diversity of shapes and sizes and lifestyles. It's thought about 10,000 species are on Earth today. Speciation is a subject about which paleontologists and taxonomists can argue probably for their entire lives. Some people believe there might be double that number of species. It's sort of hard to say. It depends on how you determine a species, but there are a lot. And this is another number that's a little strange. In eBird, at least, about over 2,000 species have been recorded in North America, and you'll see varying numbers depending on how one defines what birds in North America are. But about 2,000 have been seen here. And again, in New York City, about 350 visit us during the year. And all these birds that we see across the earth, they vary from the smallest bird, the Cuban bee hummingbird, the sunsun or sunsuncito in Cuba, which is without its beak about the end of the length of the just the end joint of your thumb, tiny creature. And the ostrich. The ostrich is 9 feet tall and 300 pounds. This is, as one of you mentioned, a bird that does not fly, a flightless bird, but it's believed that it evolved from flighted ancestors. Many birds that do not fly evolved on islands. And it's, as I understand it, that is usually possible because there's been a lack of predators that disturb the bird's nest and might go after them on the ground. So over time, they lose the ability to fly. Probably it's advantageous. They can be bigger. I don't know, this isn't my subject of research, but there must be reasons that being non-flighted ultimately and larger are advantageous. That does make intuitive sense, the large part. There are many species of flightless birds that have unfortunately gone extinct, some of them fairly recently. There are some birds on here that are still alive today, thankfully: the ostrich, the rhea, the emu, the cassowary. That little bird down in the center, the dodo, I remember as a child. It gave me great sadness reading about the demise of the dodo. But the tallest bird there, or at least the one in the center that's so large with a pink neck, labeled Apiornis, is the elephant bird. That's a bird that lived in Madagascar, and it's believed went extinct in the 17th or 18th century. There may be more recent research about that timing. And I love the bird on the right, the number 5, the Phorus racus, or terror bird of Patagonia. That's a bird with a crazy crest that lived about 12 million years ago. If you've ever seen the film 10,000 BC, cavemen were hunted by Phorus racus. So that's not really chronologically correct, but it's a fun movie, and the graphics are really cool. They're really cool looking birds. This is a bit of a digression. I just think these birds are so cool that I wanted to share them with you a little bit. But we talked a little bit about what birds are and where they came from. So let's get down to business. How do we know which bird is which? And here we are going to be talking about the birds that we can see in New York City, this great city where we live. Before we get started talking about sort of the tips on this, I want to just point out that those of you on this webinar who feel like you don't know much about birds, you probably already do know quite a bit about birds. A lot of people who think they know nothing already know quite about just from going about their daily lives. Most people would know that this big, graceful white bird is not the same thing as this white bird, which is not the same thing as this white bird. Of course, we have here mute swan, which is another Eurasian species brought here by people that has done well, flourished here on its own. And we have a domestic duck, which is a domestic version of a mallard, and a domestic goose. And you all are familiar, and you can see if you look at these birds, the differences in their shape, right, and the length of their necks, in the shape of their and conformations of their bills, right. Birdie people usually say bill rather than beak, so I'll probably usually say bill. I've been sort of lurking around bodies of water looking for birds enough in my life that I've actually several times overheard what I presume are non-birding people talking about, the ducks and geese they're seeing. And I've heard something like this exchange: someone saying, "Oh, look at the pretty ducks," and then someone else saying, "That's not a duck, that's a goose," with great with great indignation. So lots of people, if you pay attention, you start to notice the differences. And that's really at the base of learning anything, right? And it's at the base of learning birds, paying attention. It's something that is accessible to anybody. And it's something that you can get better at simply by spending time with these marvelous creatures. I think of it a little bit like getting to know, a new family, or, an in-laws family, or people at a new school. At first, you kind of confuse people. You're not sure who's who, but over time, you know exactly who that is, even if they look just like that person. A lot of you will recognize this fellow. I know it's some of your spark bird. And though this is another red bird, um, it's different, right? It's different in a number of different ways. This northern cardinal from this scarlet tanager, right? There's obviously uh, a difference in their coloration, right, and the patterning of where the black and white red is, but you can also see their bills are different, both in terms of shape and color. A different shape to their heads, right? Their cardinal has a crest. Um, Someone's asking in the chat the difference between bills and beaks. There really isn't a difference. Bill is just, as I understand it, bill is simply a word that tends to be used more by uh, uh, birders, I think, and bird researchers. It could be that beak is a more general term. I should know the answer to that. Turtles have beaks. Does a turtle have a bill? I'm not sure about that. I'm going to look that up for next time. Okay. You also, oops, oh, sorry, I forgot an important thing. You also probably, some of you recognize this song of the cardinal. And that's a different song than this one, Scarlet Tanager. Some people say a scarlet tanager sings like a robin with a sore throat. If you know the robin song, a little raspy. We'll hear the robin song, so a little later on. Please remember, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, because I'm afraid I'm going to miss them, and I want to get to them if at the end if I can. And I am looking at the Q&A, so if I'm able to fit it in, I will. You'll also all probably familiar with this bird. Here he's hunched down, you can't see his crest, but this bluebird, right, is different from this bluebird. They're both blue, but lots of differences if you start to pay attention, right, in terms of their shape, their patterning, the shapes of their bills, between this blue jay and this indigo bunting. Their calls are also quite different. Blue jays make their presence known, and I love the song of the indigo bunting. One of the sweetest of bird songs to me. There's a field sparrow singing in the back. Okay. And one more comparison here. A lot of you will recognize this beautiful, very common bird. And this bird is similar, but different, right? Similar coloring, but if you pay attention, look at the differences between this American robin and this towhee. We heard the raspy song of the tanager earlier. This is the American robin song, which is kind of a good bird song to know. And this is the towhee. He says, "Drink your tea." It's amazing. I still laugh at that after 45 years of bird watching. Okay. We are recording tonight's webinar for someone who just asked, so you'll have access to that. Okay. Some birds we know just from hearing them. This is two, a male and a female. The great horned owl. That's the male and the female hooting to one another. It's interesting. The female is larger, as female birds of prey often are, but the male has a deeper voice. Uh, that's I found that interesting. I didn't know that actually. I learned that just a few years ago. Okay. And how about this bird? You might know this call. Even if you just see it fly over. The American crow. Some birds say their name. This is the black-capped chickadee-dee-dee-dee. Some birds have calls that are rather misleading. This bird doesn't really, its call doesn't really give it the credit that it deserves. Kind of a squeaky little call of this bald eagle. And to add insult to injury, not only am I denigrating its call, but I'm showing it taking a bath in a bird bath. Bald eagles are beautiful birds, but they're just birds like everybody else. The bald eagle. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about parts of a bird, because that's helpful when we're trying to identify them. This is a lot of info in one slide, but really I just want you to look at a few things. There are a few parts of the bird that we often look at when we're trying to identify them. We often look at the color of the birds starting up at its head, at the color of the crown of the bird. We look at the supercilium, or the eyebrow. Birders usually just say eyebrow stripe. Birds sometimes have an eye line, which you can see behind this sparrow's eye, a dark line. The throat sometimes is different color than the malar. And sometimes the malar is a stripe on the side of the throat. And the breast, sides, and flanks and belly can all be different colors and are things that we pay attention to when we're trying to ID a bird. Likewise, if you look at the wing here, you can see that the long feathers at the bottom there are the primary feathers. Those are the important flight feathers, along with the secondary feathers. And then tertial feathers are a little bit more ornamental up there at the top. While wing coverts, the three groups of them cover the base of the flight feathers and protect them, and often have a different color. They create a wing bar or wing stripe that we'll look at a little bit later. If we look more closely at the wing is an incredible evolved mechanism. You can see there how the feathers fold together with the important flight feathers underneath the primaries underneath the secondaries, and the secondaries underneath the tertials, like a fan, to protect them when the wing is folded. And then you can also see those coverts that create sometimes patterns on the wing, covering the base of the feathers. When the bird's wing opens, it often exposes patches of color that are not visible with the folded wing. And here again, you can see clearly the primaries, secondaries, and tertials of the wing, along with those coverts. The bird's underwing is often a different color than the overwing. And likewise, here you can see the rump of the bird here. The rump is its butt, its upper butt. It's not called that here, but at the base of the tail. And the under tail coverts, which are the sort of the reverse side, the feathers underneath the tail that form a point, are often a different color. I'm gonna fly in here. Okay. On an actual bird, the northern mockingbird, we can see this at work. This is a mockingbird with its wings folded. You can see that beautiful pattern of folded feathers and a couple white wing bars. And you can see that when the wings open and tail open, I haven't mentioned the tail, suddenly patches of color are exposed that you didn't see before. It's thought that those patches can signal other birds of danger. It's thought also that perhaps they draw the attention of predators to less vulnerable parts of the body. A bird, it's hard for a predator to get purchase on the wing feathers or the tail feathers. The bird might lose a few feathers, but it avoids a predator going for the body. So that's thought to be possible reasons for that adaptation. If we look again at this bird body diagram of a songbird like this sparrow, you can see one of a bird that's not a songbird, not a passerine is the term. It's a non-passerine. Songbirds are most of the passerines, or which means perching birds, and water birds, raptors, many of the larger birds are non-passerines. This gull is a non-passerine, and you can see that it has all the same tracts of feathers, but they're slightly differently arranged and differently sized. It has these long tertials, long scapulars running down its back. And we can see in this picture of the beautiful hooded merganser, a bird that spends the winter in our area, what function that serves, at least in part. When this bird has its wings closed, you can see those long tertial feathers, black and white feathers draped over the back of its body. And when it fluffs up its wings, you can see again those tertials right close to the body, but you can also see a patch of white, two patches of white actually, on the bird's secondaries. And if you look at the bird sitting in the water, you don't see those feathers. And the reason for that is that the bird's wing is folded underneath the body feathers to keep it dry when this bird dives underwater to catch fish. That's an amazing adaptation of water birds that keeps their feathers dry when they are swimming, so that they can easily take off. Birds also have a coating of oil on their feathers, but I think it's an extra level of protection. You can also see how this bird can change the configuration of its head feathers. It raises up its crest in a crazy, crazy way. Really, really amazing bird. Okay, so we've talking a little bit about bird parts, but I want to really talk about how you know which is which between different species. First of all, I cannot overstate the importance of this first way to think about identifying one bird from another. Often when we go birding, we see something like this picture and we hear a bird, and what is it? Is it this or is it this? Maybe we hear both. And if we are tuned into the birds around us by their calls and songs, we can know immediately what birds are in the area. And that's cool. Not only just because who cares if you're a good birder, it is so fun. It's really my father was a birder and got me into birding, and it's been just something that's followed me throughout my life. And bird song is a big part of that. I learned bird song as a little boy, and I really do feel, and this is probably the corniest thing I'm going to say tonight, as though birds are kind of my buddies when I'm out in nature. I think, oh, there's so and so, and oh, there's so and so. What's he doing here? I hear what's around me, and it enriches the experience of being in the outdoors so much. So I just can't recommend it enough, both just for how fun it is and because it really will make you a more confident birder. Um, you'll know when you hear this that you're hearing the warbling vireo. While if you hear this, you're hearing the red-eyed vireo. Now, these are two vireos are somewhat less colorful birds in general than warblers, which we tend to associate them with. Um, and these two birds are quite similar looking. I know for people who are new to birding, it might seem almost impossible to tell them apart. But if you look at them, you can see there are differences, right? In the distinct markings on the head of the bird on the right, the coloring a little bit, very green and white versus kind of brownish. And believe it or not, when you get to know these guys, you can pick out pretty quickly based on those and on sort of the different shape of the red-eyed vireo, a little more angular, which bird you're looking at. It takes time, but if you know the song, then you're, oh, shoot, sorry, then you're set. And I want to talk a little bit about bird sound. Bird sounds are something that always intrigue people, and people want to understand a little bit better. It's a language, right, that we don't understand. And as long as I've watched birds, I still don't understand it, but I love hearing it. Um, I have come to understand who's talking, but I don't always know what they're saying. We can think of bird sound as being separated in two categories: songs and calls. Songs are generally more melodic, right? We've been listening to bird songs on all of these slides that I've been showing you. They're longer in phrases, and mostly they are sung in the spring, and often by males and usually in the morning and the evening when it's cooler. Songs are both inherited and learned, which means that bird song is really a sort of bird culture. It's something that is passed down from parent birds to child birds. And if baby birds do not learn the song from members of their own species, they do not learn the proper song among songbirds. That's particular to songbirds. Oops, I'm sorry. And I'll also just say that, most of singing is done in spring, and that's because singing is often used as both a way to attract mates and to establish territories. It's a breeding thing, right? So males are usually in the role of establishing territories and trying to attract females to their territory among birds. Some females sing. Particularly in species that are in the same area year round, or perhaps historically were in the same area year round. Calls, on the other hand, tend to be shorter and succinct, can be made any time of the year, and all birds pretty much have calls. Mute swans, by the way, I did see a question about that. Mute swans do make sounds. They don't make a lot of noise, but they do have kind of a grunting sound, and their wings actually make a thunderous sound when they go over, though that is a different sort of sound. Calls tend to have distinct purposes and meanings, and many species have a whole bunch of different calls. Oops. Well, I can move on to this, like the American robin. So what I'm going to do here is show you the different kinds of sounds that the robin makes, such as the song. It's dawn song, which is kind of an excited version of the song when the bird first wakes up and is just full of vim and vigor. And it has several kinds of alarm calls, some of them quite specific, we believe, as well as contact calls. So these are examples of the kind of calls that many birds have. And I'm going to play these robin songs and calls for you in the succession that they're written there. So take a listen. This is the dawn song. Very excited. The whinny. You hear this call a lot, the peep, when robins are alarmed. That's the tsiap. And it does seem I'm not sure what the research basis for it is, but from natural history observations, that robins do make that C call, and I've actually seen them make it when hawks are around, and I've seen them do it when a plane flies over. So interesting, interesting and complex, right? Set of vocalizations for the robin. So bird song, that's one thing. Another way, a basic way to tell one bird from another, you can see here, right? You can think that probably that osprey is hoping that the blackbird there, the red-winged blackbird, would pick on somebody its own size. Birds are different sizes, and often that can be helpful between species that are similar looking if you see them together. Size, though, is very tricky. because it sometimes can be hard to tell. This is a blackbird going after a crow, an American crow, and um, you can see here the difficulty that you might have knowing how close one bird is to you as opposed to the other. And when a bird is not with another bird or not with a landmark that the size of which you know, it can be very difficult to tell how big the bird is. Some of you might know Don Reapy, who's just a great guy and longtime park ranger, naturalist, and Jamaica Bay guardian out in Jamaica Bay. Don always tells this story, and I hope he doesn't mind that I steal it, of being on a hawk watch and with a group of people and looking through his binoculars. You know, you're on a mountaintop to see hawks during the fall when hawks come flying down the mountain ridges. Often you see them way in the distance, and keen hawk watchers are like supernatural. It's unbelievable how they can pick out hawks in the far distance. So Don looked through his binoculars and said, got a red-tailed hawk. And everybody put up their binoculars and said, where, Don? And he said, oh, okay, it's over the third ridge, going right, blah, blah. And everyone said, where is it, Don? And he said, okay, let me see. Wait a minute. And what he thought was a red-tailed hawk was actually a monarch butterfly. He'd seen the flash of red, but he couldn't really determine that the monarch butterfly, that this was quite close to him, not the flash of red of a red-tailed far in the distance. So that's just to say that beware about size. Size is helpful not just in overall size, however, but in terms of relative size of different body parts of a creature, of a bird. So here we have a downy and a hairy woodpecker. You can see that the hairy woodpecker on the right there, by the way, that's a female hairy woodpecker. The male has a red patch like the male downy, and both females do not have a red patch. So they're very similar looking, but you can see that the hairy woodpecker has a big bill, big beak and head compared to the daintier beak of the downy. And whenever I see a hairy woodpecker, if I don't say to myself, what a big beak, what a big head, then I don't have a hairy woodpecker, because it makes an impression on me how big it is compared to the rest of the body. Okay, so size, a third basic sort of tenet of, and perhaps perhaps the most important in identifying birds by sight, is this one. I love these two pictures because they're two very different birds with very similar coloring if you look at them. But what's different about them? What's a gross characteristics that's different? They're like almost comically different, this great blue heron and white-breasted nuthatch, in terms of their shape, right? They are completely different shapes, from the elegant long shape of the great blue heron to this sort of like, kind of like a racer shape of the white-breasted nuthatch. So shape is super important in identifying birds, particularly because you often can't see the color of birds when you're bird watching. You often see birds against the sky. You often see this, a silhouette. And so learning the shapes of birds will take you leagues in your confidence in birding and your ability to identify birds. When I was a boy, the field guide, which had been the sort of the birding Bible for many years, was the Peterson Guide. The Peterson Guide is still a great guide, though there's another guide that I'll talk about a little later that is a more recent one that I also like. But these silhouettes were in the front and back covers of the Peterson Guide, and I would study them. Me and my birding buddy and I, when we were young teenagers, we would study these silhouettes and quiz each other. And I got to say, it really actually it pays off, just learning the shapes of these birds. Um, I can look at this and I know what all the birds are, basically, because I recognize the shapes of, and a lot of you probably would recognize them too, right? If you look at those shapes, I bet you can identify some of them. That mourning dove up in the upper left, right? The kingfisher with the crest and the big heavy bill. There's a starling with a short stubby tail, number 4, next to a grackle, number 3. I better be right about that. Yeah, I am. Okay. Silhouettes of birds represent the shapes, and whether or not you study the silhouettes, focusing on the shape of the bird gets you a long way in understanding fundamentally what you're looking at. You're looking at a thrush versus a sparrow versus a warbler, and we're going to talk more about that. And that's whether the birds are perched or in flight. Okay. Shape. How about these two fellows? We have a mockingbird, which we saw before, and we have a willet, which is a shorebird. You can see that again, their colors are very similar. What differences do you see in their shape? What differences do you see in their body shape or the shape of their body parts? You can just throw them into the chat if you see any differences there that stand out to you. These are two birds that are very common in their habitat in New York City, right? So the bill, right? That long bill on the willet and the long legs, right? Very, very different than, and the long neck too, right? Compared to, exactly, long neck, Justine, compared to the rather bullet shape of the body of the mockingbird, right? You can see how long the tail is of the mockingbird compared to the stubbier tail of the willet. So all of these shape characteristics immediately tell you what you're looking at, even if you don't see the colors of the bird or if there's a similar bird with exactly the same coloring. Um, Differences can be a little more subtle, like these two birds, this laughing gull and this Forster's tern. Again, here you can see between these two birds, there's some differences in color and pattern, but you can see that the laughing gull, right, has that kind of heavier, rounder shape compared to the really pointy, long shape of the Forster's tern, long wings, long, pointy bill. Um, Short legs on the Forster's tern compared to longer legs on the laughing gull, right? Um, so those are the kind of things we're looking at all the time, helping us determine what we're looking at. Are we looking at a gull or a tern? And that helps us narrow it down. It can get even subtler. These two ducks bedevil even experienced birders. This is a good picture of them. You can see see what you think looks different about them, right? If you focus in on the head, right, you can see that the greater scalp has kind of a peak towards the front. The lesser scalp has a peak towards the back. You can also see there's a little color difference in the coloring, but that's a hard one to see often in the right light, and it's a little tricky to be sure that you're to be certain about it. So shape can be very subtle, and this is also a place to say that birds again can shift their feathers, right? So sometimes the birds can lay those feathers flat, they can raise them up, right? And that's the case with crests. I'll return to that great first picture. I was so happy to find this picture. I've always remembered a few years ago in my beginning birding class, one of the participants said, after we talked about all these different ways of determining different bird ID for different birds, she said, well, this is all great, but what I'd really like to know is which birds have crests. I've always remembered that, and it is important. These are three species that probably are the crestiest of our birds in the city. They really have that kind of triangular sort of crazy crest. The tufted titmouse there on the left, there are two of them, the female and male northern cardinal going from left to right, and the blue jay. But here you can also see, right, that the birds can move their crest. That female cardinal has her crest way up. She's paying attention, which is what's going on over on the right, where I believe the cardinals and the blue jay have their crest down in a bit of an aggressive stance. Birds can move those feathers around, so don't be fooled by it. And another more specific aspect of shape is about that beak or bill, right? Pay close attention to the bill when you're first learning to watch birds. That often holds the clue to what you're looking at, right? The thick bill of the sparrow, and all of these bills, by the way, are shapes that and conformations that have evolved to help birds eat what they eat, right? They are bills that enable the birds to eat their main food sources. So sparrows and finches have a big chunky bill that can crush seeds. Thrushes and warblers and a bunch of other songbirds. I'm grouping a lot of birds together here because it's just too much information. They'll have kind of like a more kind of quintessential songbird beak, kind of, not too pointy, not too chunky. And there's a variety of bills in there. So I'm grouping things together a bit. but those are for insects and fruit. Then we have birds that really mostly just eat insects. Swallows, which are aerial insectivores. Swallows have a tiny little beak, but they can open their mouth really loud. These are actually swallows in Jamaica Bay. One of you had mentioned the swallows there. They're nesting there and fighting over the nest box. Swallows and other birds that catch insects on the wing, like chimney swifts or whippoorwills, nighthawks, they can open their mouths so wide, almost like whales, and they kind of just like swallow the bugs up. They kind of scoop them up with their big mouths as they fly, and that's compared to other insect-eating birds like flycatchers that really tend to more go out and snatch a bug. And they tend to have what you can see on the end of this great crested flycatcher's bill. They have a little hook because they need to snatch it, right? They need to snatch a bug or a fly or a dragonfly. And so a lot of aerial insectivores that go out for a specific slightly larger insect will have a little hook on the bill. Flycatchers, tanagers, actually, some have a little bit of a hook too. They catch a lot of bees. And the last group, a very different group of birds, of land birds, is our birds of prey, right? The bald eagle. They have those crazy hooked beaks to catch larger prey, right? Prey that might be running away from them that they need to hold on to. How about water birds? We have ducks and waterfowl that have a sort of sweet looking flat bill. They tend to eat plants and plankton, which is kind of a mixture of little animals and plants, and very small prey. And that's both ducks that feed on shallow water and ducks that dive underwater for smaller prey have a similar sort of beak. And then we have birds like the double-crested cormorant. I love these up close bird pictures of crazy birds. You can just really see what exotic creatures they are when you see them up close, right? This is the double-crested cormorant, and fish-eating waterfowl like this and mergansers often have bills like this that have serrated edge, and they have a really powerful hook that they chase after fish underwater and catch them. They hunt fish underwater. I do research for New York City Audubon as well, some banding research. We band cormorants, and my first time banding, I got too close to a young cormorant with that beak, and it tried to snatch my eyeball right out of its socket. Luckily, my big Neanderthal brow ridge stopped it, and it just, cut me. But I never have gotten quite so close to the head of a young cormorant since. Okay, shorebirds, a different kind, sandpipers. Sandpipers are among a larger group that we think of as shorebirds, have a sort of less dangerous looking bill, but effective for them. They tend to probe in the mud and in marshes for little invertebrates. So they tend to have a long sort of tubular bill. And then we have herons and egrets. They go after big prey. Some of them are omnivores. They'll kind of eat anything they can get their beaks on. This great blue heron has I wish I knew what that fish is. I feel like I do, but this is a picture taken in Jamaica Bay, I believe. Uh, this great blue heron has this fish in its bill, but often what herons and egrets do is actually spear a fish. They'll kind of they wait and they get their eye on a fish, and then they plunge down and spear it straight through. So they have that straight, sharp bill that allows them to do that. Nature isn't always pretty, but it's effective for those birds. Okay, so we're thinking about all of those different kinds of bills, right? And now I want to take a look a bit. Having looked at a lot of these birds, I want to take a look at little glimpse of a few different kinds of songbirds, and I'm going to quiz you on these later, that have different shapes. We have this guy, and this guy, and this guy. We've seen a couple of these. The one on the left there has a big chunky bill, right? That's a song sparrow, right? I picked these pictures because they all look a little similar, right? Except for their shape. Then we have a sort of a dainty bill that eats fruit, a hermit thrush. And finally, we haven't seen this bird. This is a thrasher. Thrashers and mockingbird, they're related to mockingbirds. They all have a slightly down curved bill, the brown thrasher. And how about a few more? This little guy up on the left, That's a house wren. Has that thin little bill and an active little body, often horizontal. Then we have a flycatcher, upright, with a bill with a little hook on it. Sits up there waiting to go catch a fly. And then we have a yellow-rumped warbler, sort of again, kind of a typical bird shape, a bill that's sort of in between. We're going to come back to these guys a little bit later. Okay. All right. Something that you can't overlook, but we haven't really talked about specifically as a basic way to ID different birds is this, right? Northern cardinal and blue jay, similar shaped birds, but very different in one clear way, right? Their color and their pattern. So color, of course, is very important in IDing birds. But again, often you can't see it when you're seeing birds in the field. Birds are brightly colored. We don't fully understand why they're brightly colored. We do understand, though, that male birds tend to be as brightly colored as they can be because it tends to please the female. It seems to show off that they're healthy. And birds can be colored in smaller patches or larger patches. This yellow warbler versus the little shoulder patches of the yellow-rumped warbler. Or different body parts, the yellow bill and black legs of the great egret versus the black bill and yellow feet of the snowy egret. Oops. And as we get further and further into the birdie weeds, we get into smaller patches of color that we call field marks. And these come into play with all bird IDs, but particularly with birds like warblers and sparrows. We look at these field marks, and when we looked at the diagram of the bird earlier, we saw a lot of these. You see on this actual bird, we saw the wing bars that this bird has. You can see this bird has a partial eye ring, right? It has an eye ring that doesn't go all the way around. It has a black mask and a white throat. It has these interesting breast patches and a yellow rump, because it is indeed a yellow-rumped warbler, but white undertail coverts underneath the tail. So when we're looking at a bird in the field, I remember as a young birder looking, and I still do it if I'm abroad and I don't know the birds, saying to myself when I had the bird in my binoculars, okay, what do I need to remember to look at? Okay, what color is the throat? Does it have an eye ring? Does it have an eye line? Does it have a wing bar? I try to remember it so that when I get to the field guide and the bird flies away, I know what I've seen. So it's good to have these different field marks in your head that you want to kind of note as you're seeing the bird in the field. One of the main ones is one I've talked about, the eye stripe, right, of the house wren that we just saw on the right there, no eye stripe, or very light one, and the Carolina wren on the left that has a very clear eye stripe. The wing bar that we looked at earlier, this catbird on the left, again, this is a relative of the thrasher that we saw and the mockingbird. They all mimic other birds, they have a repertoire of the songs of other birds and they sing them, fragments of them. The gray catbird does not have wing bars, while the mockingbird does have those white wing bars. And you can see some other differences right there in the pattern of black on the head and eye. And right, these field marks are really helpful in identifying warblers, say between this northern parula and this immature male common yellow throat. Another important thing to think about when we're trying to ID different kinds of birds, what's the difference between this little striped bird and this one? There's something that helps us a lot to know which one we're seeing when we see the birds in the field. Here's the first one, the black and white warbler. You can see that it behaves very differently from the other. It's hard to keep up with him, right? The black and white warbler climbs up and down trees like a nuthatch. He climbs up and down tree trunks, up and down and around. Where'd he go? There he is. The female black and white warbler versus the water thrush. The water thrush is actually a warbler. It's a confusing bird name. It is not a thrush, but it is a warbler that hangs out by the water. Sort of a big warbler, so it looks a bit like a thrush, I suppose. It tends to bob its tail, as you can see there. and it pokes around in the mud on the edge of lakes and streams. Here's another bird that moves in a very characteristic way. This is again our robin, American robin. Watch how it moves. And catch it. It runs and it stops. Ooh, caught a worm. It sits upright and it takes a few more steps. It's listening for worms under the soil, listening for the creepy crawly of a worm, triangulating it and snatching it. So this robin moves very differently with some hops and a stop from this bird. These common grackles, oh, there goes a song sparrow. These common grackles tend to kind of march around like cowboys. They strut around and they hunt and peck, right? They're hunting for seeds and grains. So they act very differently than a robin does, right? Also, you'll see these birds are in a flock, and robins actually also flock during certain times of the year, but there are some birds that you never see in a flock and some birds that you always see in a flock. So that's also something to pay attention to. Another bird, like the water thrush that bobs its tail, is one that one of you mentioned, the eastern phoebe. The phoebe bobs his little tail up and down. And when you see a flycatcher like this phoebe sitting upright on a branch and bobbing its tail, you know it's a phoebe because only the phoebe does that. The phoebe also says his name. Phoebe, Phoebe. And the phoebe is sometimes confused, but has a different call and different behavior than the pewee, who says his or her name. Pewee. The pewee does not bob its tail and just sits on a branch and waits to go out and get a bird when it's not singing. Sweet little bird that lives in the woods. Lots of birds singing here. Okay. Just a few more basic ways to what things to think about when you're trying to figure out which bird is which. We'll go back to the black and white warbler and northern water thrush because it's sort of obvious, but I didn't state it. They are in a different habitat, right? Every habitat has different birds. So when you get to know that, you know what to expect when you go to a certain place because you know what the birds are that generally are seen there, right? So a woodland habitat on trees, you'll see the black and white warbler, right? Stream sides and lake sides are likely to find the northern water thrush. And birders can use habitats as a bit of a shortcut, going back to these greater and lesser scaup. Greater scaup like greater bodies of water, salt water, whereas lesser scaup tend to like smaller bodies of water, fresh water. So I remember first being out with Don Reapy in Jamaica Bay and seeing a whole raft or a group of scaup. And he said, greater scaup. And everyone kind of looked astonished in awe. And he's a really good birder. He knows his water birds, particularly from being out in Jamaica Bay for so long, but he also knows that greater scaup live there. So he sort of can use that knowledge to seem as if he has a superpower. Don does have superpowers, but you know, that one's a little bit, he has a little bit of a crutch. Birds also come around different time of year, right? Those of you who've been out birding in the winter know that there are lots of white-throated sparrows around, and they're about to go back north, and shipping sparrows, which have been south of us mostly, are going to come back north. So birds migrate, and every time of year in New York City is different. There are different birds that can be seen and heard every time of year, and that's what makes birding, another thing that makes birding so exciting anywhere you bird, particularly in the northern areas when we have migration. And I'm going to get to here to a question that one of you asked in the chat. A final way, think that a couple final things to just think about that make birding a little confusing, but I just want to make note of them are that females and males look different, right? The female cardinal looks different than the male. Females usually are drabber in color, more camouflaged so that they're hidden on the nest, while males are colorful and seem to be in competition with females to be the most colorful, right? To show their health and how they have extra energy to expend on beautiful colors. Some birds, however, do not look different to us. That is the male and the female. Birds like the blue jay or the egrets and herons, we can't tell the difference. We do know that birds see wavelengths of light that people do not see. Birds can see in the ultraviolet spectrum of light. And so it's possible that birds see each other differently than we do. It could be that the male or the female have extravagant other colors that are only visible that are in the ultraviolet spectrum. Our brains can't encode those colors. We can't see them. It's kind of a crazy thing to think about, that there are colors that we just can't imagine because we haven't evolved to see them. But it's possible that male blue jays look different than female blue jays to the blue jays, but they don't look different to us. Okay, and finally, birds change through the year, right? Time of year matters. Right now in the spring is when birds are most colorful, but birds in the fall often look different. So a scarlet tanager male looks entirely different in the fall. You can see a little of the red is left, but he mostly turns green where he was red in the spring. So that was a lot of information, I know. It's really just to give you a little taste of all the different things you're thinking about when you're trying to ID different birds. And we're trying to narrow it down to help decide what we're looking at. And the more you learn about these different characteristics that differ between different species, the more confident you're going to feel in identifying what you're seeing. GIS is you sometimes hear, by the way, general impression, shape, and size. That goes to what I was talking about of just the sense of the bird, the shape of the bird, the behavior of the bird. So important, regardless of the coloration or the size. Okay. I'm going to look at these birds again. See if you can look at them for a few seconds and see if you know what they are. See if you can remember what we're looking at here and how we know what they are. Between the song sparrow, this little guy over here with the big eye, you can tell that a lot of things like to eat him. He has a big eye on the side of his head. He's always looking for somebody who's out for him. The hermit thrush, and this little guy, relative of the catbird and the mockingbird, the brown thrasher with that curvy bill and long tail. And then we have these guys. This little active one on the left does not have an eye stripe. The house wren. This one's sitting on a branch upright, waiting to go catch a fly with a little bit of a crest. A flycatcher, the eastern wood pewee, or this little guy, kind of a typical bird shape, the yellow-rumped warbler. Okay. So we need some help, right? How do we go about can't remember all this, and we have some helpful aids for us, and there are just a few things that you need really to be a full-fledged, as it were, birder. Oops, sorry. Really, you need binoculars really to get close to birds, to see them up close, right? And most people, when they first use binoculars, kind of go, whoa, because you suddenly are in the life of the bird. You suddenly have access to all the crazy things that birds do. And what are they doing? It's a mystery, and it continues to be a mystery to me. All the time I've watched birds, they're always doing something that I don't expect. And I feel so privileged to be let into their world, to have access to it through binoculars. There are a few things to think about if you're thinking about binoculars. And by the way, I'm hoping that I can send all the participants in this a little email with just the basic rundown of this last information, which includes tips on binoculars, field guides, resources. So don't feel you have to scribble down all this. I'm going to send you some basic information about all the things we're going to talk about just in the next couple of minutes. Okay. But when you're thinking about binoculars, you usually see two numbers, and the first number, the 8 or the 7 here, is the magnification. It's 8 times bigger than it is in real life when you see it through the binoculars. 7 or 8 is a good number. If it's more than that, it becomes a little too close and it tends to shake a little bit. And also, you don't see as much background. So it's hard to find the bird because it's too close up. So 7 or 8, I find 8 is a good number for me. But when you're starting out, some people have a hard time finding that darn bird, and 7 can be good if that's the case. The next number is the size of the objective lens, the size of the field that you're seeing. And you generally want something around 30, oh shoot, sorry, 35 or 40, 42 for that, to have enough background that you can find the bird. You can see that tree limb, you can see that bush in the background, and you know where you're looking. Field guides, and like I said, I'm going to send some more tips about binoculars. Field guides, that's really important. I find the field guide, a field guide is your friend, and if you have a field guide, you can bird by yourself. And some people like to bird by themselves. I love to bird by myself. I also love to bird with people. I usually mentioned that earlier. That's another real um, gift of birding, that you can do it any way you want. You can do it by yourself. You can never see another person if you're sick of people. If you probably not if you bird in Central Park, but it can really be a sort of meditative, peaceful experience, time with yourself. And it can also be a super fun thing that you do with other people. It can be a game. It can be a competition. It can be whatever you want to make it. But I digress. However you do it, a field guide is helpful. And there are a number of field guides, and you want to think about a bunch of different things. A lot of people tend to think that photos, of course, would be the best resource. But in practice, and most birders, I think, find that drawings, paintings of birds are actually better. And that's because photos always have some artifact of lighting. They have an artifact of shadow. And you can't tell when you're seeing a photo, is that belly dark because it's in shadow, or is it dark because it's dark? Huh. The illustration takes that variable out of the equation, so you can really see what the color is, and your mind understands when you see birds in natural lighting. So illustrations are really best. And the two best guides really are the two at the top there, the Sibley guide, which has really become, I think, the new birding standard. It came out, oh gosh, maybe 15 years ago now. And it's a little bit more detailed in some ways than the Peterson, which is also still a great guide. And many people prefer the Peterson, particularly when they're still first starting out birding. I have both guides. If you get into more into birding, if you're not already into it, you will find that you accumulate guides. And we have a number of other guides here that are good and that people have recommended in my class, have all liked, and that I also have in my own collection. Okay. Also, every guide has an app, by the way, these days. And apps, most of them are free, or actually, I don't think all of them are free. Audubon's is free. Others are not much. And they provide a really easy way to look at birds on your phone and hear bird song. They have bird song recordings, so they can be really useful if you're trying to figure out what you're seeing. But it's not the same as having a field guide you can compare in the field. Merlin ID, some of you are mentioning, is an app from Cornell that helps you identify the bird. And I've actually never used it, but I know a few people who've been in my class who were just overwhelmed at first by seeing how many birds there are, were very helped by Merlin. So you might want to check that out if you're finding it all a bit too much. Okay. And finally, I want to mention eBird. eBird is this amazing online database that birders enter their sightings into all around the world. And it's become this amazing conservation tool, both a conservation tool that keeps track of bird populations around the globe, and also a way to keep track of your own birding records. I have spent many hours entering all my birding records from when I was, I think the earliest is when I was like 5, into eBird, so that all of my birding records are in eBird. And I can see every time I've recorded it, that I've seen a scarlet tanager, every time that I've seen a mallard. And I see the notes that I wrote as a child. It's a really beautiful way to keep track of your own experiences and the ones you've shared with other people. You can share a checklist and also contribute to conservation. So I really recommend you check it out, ebird.org. Okay, and just a little note, if you're brand new to birding and you're worrying about what to wear, you don't have to go this far. um, uh, and you don't really need to go this far either, but there are certain things that are helpful, along with binoculars and a field guide. It's useful to have a place to put your field guide. I wear cargo pants, which I understand are out of style, uh, but I find them very useful. And it's good to wear sort of muted colors because birds can be startled by bright colors and particularly big patches of white, because as we've seen, white can be used to alert birds of danger. Okay, so I hope you'll all go see some birds. I'll again include these in my email. I know we're running a little bit late, but I'm still going to answer some questions for those who'd like to stay. Um, I hope you'll go see some birds. There are many ways to bird in New York City, in all the boroughs. Please check out your local birding club, and please check out NewYorkCityAudubon.org. Um, so many great parks in New York City, in all the boroughs: Central Park in Manhattan, Pelham Bay Park in the Bronx, Prospect Park in Brooklyn, Jamaica Bay. So many great parks like Mount Loretta Unique Area in Staten Island, and so many great birds to see. I feel like I didn't give you enough birds. Right now, if you go out birding, all of these warblers, up to 30 species, are coming through New York City. Also right now, raptors are nesting across the city. This is Pale Male and Lola, the famous red-tailed hawks that nested on Fifth Avenue. But red-tailed hawks are nesting all over the city, and many other sorts of raptors, including the beautiful osprey that nests out in Jamaica Bay. Birds are nesting on the beaches right now, like the American oyster catcher. Oops, that's a great call. And harbor herons are back. We have up to 10 species of herons and egrets that nest on islands in the harbor. We survey those birds at the end of May. I'm getting ready to do that on all these islands in the harbor, and you can see them come foraging. You can learn about all this stuff on our website at NewYorkCityAudubon.org. Please come take a look. We have a new website and a brand new section on parks, with birding guides to all the parks, to over 100 parks in the city. I won't say all of them. I hope you'll also get involved in our conservation programs. We have Project Safe Flight that takes care of migrating birds. Many birds migrate and die passing through New York City. I've started to take a dark turn, but it's a very important problem for birds, and we work to protect birds passing through the city. We helped pass a landmark bird safe building law last year in New York City, and are continuing to work on that. We have monitors that go looking for birds that are injured and die in collisions to help keep a database of that information. We monitor the tribute in light to help protect birds from getting caught in the tribute every fall. We do conservation research for birds that eat horseshoe crab eggs, and habitat restoration, beach cleanups, and public education on the beaches. Oh, I have one more. I thought I had an extra. I included an extra. I didn't mean to do this 3 times, but hey, if this will help you learn them. What do we have here? We have everybody, song sparrow, hermit thrush, brown thrasher. And we have a house wren, pewee, and a yellow rump warbler. And I hope this is not the end for all of you. I hope it's just the beginning, or perhaps this is the middle for some of you who've already been out birding. Um, and I'm happy to look at the Q&A and answer some questions. I went a little long. I always go long because there's just so many birds to talk about. I just can't stop myself. So I'm going to look at the Q&A here and see what questions people have. I'm sorry for some of you have to go. I'm really glad that you could join us. So I think I addressed some of these. How do you tell a boy from a girl blue jay? We can't, right? We cannot tell the difference. Someone asked, can birds intermarry to form a new species? That's a very good question. Closely related species sometimes do interbreed, and we end up with recognizable sort of variants that are combinations of the two species. And all around the world, taxonomists are trying to figure out what's a different species and what's not a different species. And it has often to do with whether they will interbreed. But some species that we really are established as separate species do occasionally interbreed for reasons that ecologists study. Birds are kept from interbreeding by all sorts of variables, and people may have some impact on whether or not those variables that have historically been the case continue to be the case. I'm sort of talking off the top of my head here. We need an ecologist here to tell me to shut up and give the best answer to that question. But the answer is sometimes they do interbreed. I've answered a few of these, so I'm not going to answer the ones that I've already talked about. Do birds that pass by during spring migration go back by the same path when they return to their wintering grounds? That's a really great question. And the answer is sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. It varies from species to species. I imagine in all species it varies somewhat, but some species we have learned through modern tagging mechanisms that actually use radio waves so we can track a bird, and geolocators to track a bird. We've learned that some birds take very different routes. Some of them will go, inland north, and then they go around inland going north and then along the coast going south. Some take, like I was just reading, wood thrushes and ovenbirds. I can't remember quite the difference, but they take different routes than we knew of, and different groups of the same species take different routes as well. So the answer is yes. Birds sometimes take different routes, and that also affects what birds we expect to see in New York City. We don't expect to see Connecticut warblers here in the spring because they don't usually come through here, but they come through in the fall. So I believe they usually fly west of us in the spring, but they come down through New York City in some numbers, not many, in the fall. Someone asked about birds mimicking other birds. I was sorry I had to sort of rush over that. An hour is not enough time. And I meant to say, I hope some of you, when I do beginning birding again in the fall and then again in the spring, will join me. It's really fun. We have 3 whole evenings to talk about birds, and 2 afternoons or a whole day for Jamaica Bay to go to Central Park in Jamaica Bay. So it's impossible to get to everything we want to in an hour and a half. But why birds mimic other birds? I think the answer simply is that it's worked for those birds, that some historical mockingbird or catbird or brown thrasher started to do that. And I imagine a male, well, they started to do it. The male at least started to do it, and the females liked it. So it's become sort of like a peacock's tail that gets bigger and bigger over time because apparently it pleases the female. The mockingbird's repertoire has gotten bigger and bigger, and the more successful and older northern mockingbird is, the bigger repertoire it has. So it's a successful mate attracting device, basically, that for reasons that I don't think anyone knows, this particular group of birds developed. And other birds do it too. Starlings mimic. It's hard to hear it. It's very fast, but some people actually slow the song down and you can hear that they're mimicking other species. How long can a water bird stay underwater? That's a good question. That's the kind of question that people ask. People ask how fast a bird goes. They certainly can stay underwater for several minutes. I don't know what the record is, but you often find when you're watching water birds that you have to wait a while. Oh, he went under. and you wait a while. Diving birds particularly can go underwater for a long time. Okay, I want to let people go, but I'll answer a couple more questions. Um, Someone said I'm not an early morning person. You have my sympathy. I'm not either, to be honest, but I have to be during migration season. There is another time to watch birds, and that is the late afternoon and early evening. Birds in the spring sing again at that time at dusk. There's sort of a second chorus at dusk, and they become more active before bed because it's cooler, because they need to eat before they go to bed. So yes, if you do not want to get up in time to watch birds in the morning, go out around 4:30 or so, and that's also a good time to see birds. 4:35. Um, House sparrows do make a racket, and a lot of birds, they roost together at night. So I think they're probably talking to one another, scuffling for place in their roosting area. But house sparrows, that chatter is also their song. So they have a very simple song that sounds very much like the chatter. So it's hard to know exactly what that chattering means, but you do hear it a lot in the city. You hear those house sparrows chattering. Um, Okay, let's see. What time is it? I don't want to. Well, people will stay. I'm going to answer a few more questions because I hate not answering them. But feel free to go, and I appreciate it. If those of you stayed, thank you so much, and I hope that we'll see you again. I'll answer a few more questions though for a few who want to hang on. Um, do I bird in other countries? Yes. Birding in other countries is a whole nother thing, and it expands traveling in such a way that every place you go is fascinating simply based on the birds. uh, the birds are different all over the world, and I have birded particularly in a few places in Europe and Spain where I spent a lot of time, which has amazing birds. Central America, um, love the European birds particularly, but I want to go everywhere to look at the birds. Everywhere I go, occasionally people will say to me, "Oh, we thought of going to Tahiti, but what's the difference? It's just another beach." And I go, what? It's entirely different. All the birds are different. So yeah, birding in other countries is just a total rush and so much fun. Okay, let's see. Gosh. Uh, Starlings. I think starlings are still pretty common. I'm not really sure whether populations have gone down. They're certainly common in New York City. I don't actually know whether in rural areas starling populations are what they once were. I suspect they may not be as common in some areas because there aren't as many farms, and starlings probably ate a lot of grains and food from farms. Um, I don't really have information on cameras for you, but I will send in the email information and some guides to look at for binoculars and spotting scopes, which I think will also connect to some guides about cameras. So if you're interested, also you can email me, and I can connect you with some bird photographers who can help you with birding equipment. Um, let's see. Okay. How often have bald eagles been sighted in New York City? Bald eagles have become more and more common in the city. They've rebounded across the country, and we now know that actually bald eagles have bred in New York City in the last couple of years. A pair has bred here. I don't really want to talk about where because the people who know where it is don't really like us to talk about it. But bald eagles now winter in the city around the and are present around throughout the whole year, and they breed all around the city in New Jersey, on Long Island. So we're excited about bald eagles coming to the city and breeding here more often. Um, um, I would get out in the morning to see birds as early as you can. It's really fun to go out actually at dawn. It's kind of a sort of I don't call things many things spiritual, but it's a really beautiful experience. But I would say in general, try to get out by like 7 or 7:30 before it gets when it's still cool and birds are still kind of waking up and the sun's hitting the leaves. That's when birds really start to get excited. 7 or 7:30 during migration time. Um, How long do birds live? That's a good question. They live different lengths of time. I think songbirds generally live, if they make it past the second year of life, because the first year of life, because a lot of birds don't make it through that first year. It's a hard year. Birds generally live, maybe 5, 10 years, but larger birds, birds of prey, are long-lived. Parrots are very long-lived, as some of you may know. So it really varies, depends on the kind of bird. Um, if you want to understand the difference between different kinds of hawks, that's a whole nother ball of wax. I can't really go into the details of that, but a red-tailed hawk is a shorter-tailed hawk, a buteo, and a Cooper's hawk is an accipiter. So if you Google buteo, buteo versus accipiter, ACCIPITER, that will help you figure out that difference. And go out, if you go out birding or take other courses with us, we will definitely get into buteos versus accipiters. All right, I'm going to answer these last two questions, then I'm going to let you all go. When do birds molt? Birds molt different times of the year. Most birds molt before spring breeding season starts. So sort of before they migrate, or in some cases while they're migrating. And then often birds will molt after breeding season. Males then molt out of their colorful plumage often, because it's both energy expenditure and it makes them more vulnerable, makes them more visible to predators. So most songbirds at least molt a couple times a year, before breeding season and after breeding season, but it really varies. Molt science is a whole thing that I've wanted to learn more about and understand better. It's very complex, but that's the basic pattern. You'll see that birds change. If you see birds in the tropics in the late winter, you'll see they're molting into their spring plumage. Our birds, I mean, the birds that pass through our area. And then when you see them in the fall, you'll see that they're molting into their drabber colors. The final question is it reasonable to expect to be able to bird on a high floor or balcony in New York City? Some people do. You need a good binoculars or a good spotting scope, and you need to just sit and pay attention, because birds are flying over New York City all the time, particularly during migration. One of our scientists associated with New York City Audubon actually has sound equipment, and he listens and identifies hundreds of species of birds flying over New York City with his sound equipment and from his balcony. So it's certainly possible. If you're looking for other field guides, I would just recommend you go on Amazon and look for South American Field Guide, or feel free to email me. I actually have some information about that I can share with you. Okay, so I'm going to let you all go. I could just keep talking about birds forever, but it's been a real joy talking to you all. And I hope that you'll come join us at New York City Audubon in some of our walks, or with our conservation work, or whether or not you join New York City Audubon. I hope you'll please go out and bird, and this has been helpful to you. I look forward to seeing you all sometime in the future in the field, and I hope you have a good night. Take care.